Hey YouTube community, it's Hannah. Hi. I'm getting to you later than I usually do in the day. I usually do this right after my workout, but it's been busy. I wanted to talk about the 5 characteristics of money, hopefully really quick. The 5 characteristics of money, which almost none of us have ever thought about unless you got into Bitcoin somehow, because then you have to kind of retroactively like ask yourself what the fuck is money and like why would anything be worth anything. The 5 characteristics are durability, portability, divisibility, uniformity, and acceptability. And uniformity is sometimes like the word fungibility can be used. It's the same thing. So I know I ran through that really quick, but I'm going to like slow down here. So I first started learning more about Bitcoin, which I'd already been investing in, um, which was easy. It's an easy ask because you start putting some of your money into Bitcoin and then you see that it goes up and your other money doesn't go up and you're like, that matters to me, you know? And then within months or years, or for some people, they do a lot of research on the front end before they even put any money in Bitcoin. I was one of those people that I just wanted to like check it out, you know, and then it took a little bit of time for me to understand the dynamics of like what was happening with my fiat dollars and the US dollar going down essentially in terms of purchasing power, and my money in Bitcoin sawtoothing around but going up before I developed like a healthier curiosity to start learning more about the kind of like theory behind things. So I have benefited enormously personally from following Michael Saylor, and getting myself a YouTube PhD in what Michael Saylor has to say. And he's the CEO of a company called Strategy. So I cannot recommend that enough. And also a guy named Robert Breedlove, who has a podcast that last I knew it was called What is Money? And I think he might have changed the name of the podcast. I'm not sure. But anyway, it was called What is Money? And I'm a commercial driver for a living. And so I've driven hundreds of thousands of miles listening to whatever it is that I'm into, which in recent years has been financial stuff. And there are so many savvier, smarter, more like economically trained people than me that you could listen to on the internet, that are going to have more sophisticated stuff to say. But I proudly occupy my status as somebody who's come up from a completely like paycheck to paycheck and blue collar working class kind of like mindset with really no education about investments, no education about stores of value, no education about commodities, to being somebody who's like pretty laser focused on Bitcoin to the point that I'm a Bitcoin miner and like am establishing my own little personal flywheel, um, because I've come to understand that simply earning in dollars, US dollars, and saving in US dollars is not going to get me where I need to go and where I want to go personally. Um, and so when I stumbled across Robert Breedlove talking really extensively and taking a deep dive into the 5 characteristics of money, that was something that kind of stuck with me. And I just wanted to discuss it a little bit here for you. So when I run down these 5 characteristics, I would like you to enter into the thought experiment with me of comparing Bitcoin to gold, because gold has been the traditional store of value for 3,000 plus years. And you might think, why would I care about that? Because we're kind of in this like fiat like brainwashed status where we just think that money is the thing that's issued by the government. We don't even think that. It's just like money is just money. And and especially here, you know, us in the US, people in other countries with less stable, more volatile currencies, not volatile the good way, but volatile the bad way, have had to opt into different ways to preserve their wealth and preserve their earning power more aggressively than us here in the US. And like, we're in a pretty fucked situation here in the US in terms of the declining purchase power of our fiat currency, which is the US dollar. But it's just that it's been the best. They're all bad, but it's been the best one. And it used to be pegged to gold So that's the reason that gold is significant, because the whole premise of the US dollar being valuable in the first place, to the extent that we convinced all the other countries in the world to peg their currencies to our currency, was because our currency was backed by gold. And then there was this like political rug pull that happened, which is a very interesting story in itself, where we unpegged our currency from the gold standard, and then all of the downstream effects of like what happens with like an unbacked fiat currency are occurring for us here in the US, and they're occurring a little bit more slowly than are happening for some of the other countries in the world, with their currencies falling off a cliff faster than ours. So when I encountered, and I was just like heavy on driving along commercially, earning my little paycheck in US dollars, and learning about what Michael Saylor had to say, and learning about what Robert Breedlove had to say, and a few other people in that space. The concept of the 5 characteristics of money were really interesting to me, because as for most of us, I hadn't really considered it. And so the first one being durability. So durability means that, like, if I save $100 today, I can expect that same $100 to have the same purchasing power of $100 next month, next year, 10 years from now. And I think that in the dollar, you don't have to be an economist at this point to understand that next year, let alone 10 years from now. I mean, the question that Michael Saylor always poses is like, you have $1 million and you want to preserve that for your grandchildren, Are you going to put that in dollars and like bury it under the floorboards of your house? Probably not, because I think we all just instinctually get at this point that by the time that that is dug up by the grandchildren, it might be worth $50,000. You know what I mean? It's not going to be worth what it is right now. So the question of preserving wealth is a burning question, and gold has been a store of value, and the decoupling of the US dollar from gold has rendered it so that gold has tended to still be a preservation of value. It hasn't necessarily been like it's going to the moon or anything like that. I mean, there's been a lot of manipulation in the precious metals markets, so we'll see what happens with that. But we definitely know that if you were to put $1 million under the floorboards of your house for your grandchildren, like that does not represent a preservation of your economic energy that went into that, you know? So if you were to put $1 million into gold and put that into the floorboards of the house, that would probably stand the test of time a lot better. And with Bitcoin, it would absolutely have like performed like, I mean, Bitcoin goes up between 100 and 140 or 160% per year. So your grandchildren would be like completely stoked on that, you know? So again, taking $1 million, burying the floorboards of your house, whether this is, you know, in this thought experiments like digital or physical, it's like US dollars. I think we just all get that that's not going to be remotely worth because of the uncoupling of gold and the dollar. Gold would be a better bet, and Bitcoin would be something that would have like jumped way up by that time, by the time of our grandchildren's time, you know? So the first characteristic of money being durability, that's the question of like, I work for my paycheck. I work for my living. I put like effort and like time, like sweat equity into that. How can I preserve that? You know, I think which we all care about. So the second characteristic of money being portability. Now, this is the one where Bitcoin really shines, because to transfer like a life's savings in the form of gold, for instance, and to take that across state lines, or to take that across international lines, or to just like completely move that to a different country because perhaps the political situation in the country that you're in has turned unfavorable. Like gold is going to be that's going to be a tough challenge there. You know what I mean? And even with cash, that's going to be a tough challenge. We still, you know, the ones and zeros of our credit debit system that represents like our interface really with like the US dollar, which is like largely not cash based now. I mean, if you take cash on the airport and TSA and everything, like you know what you're up against with that. 10,000, anything over $10,000. And I've traveled with like large quantities of silver, which is like super heavy. And you get into a whole thing, you can't put it in your check baggage because then like somebody could steal it and you wouldn't know. But so you have to have it in your carry on, but it's like crazy heavy. And then they're going to challenge you at TSA depending on how much it is, right? You know, so the question of trying to move large amounts of wealth with gold, or silver, or even cash, that's very, very challenging. Bitcoin really comes out ahead on this because it's digital. It's a digitally native currency, so I'm not going to get too much into that right now. Divisibility is, one bit, like a lot of people still don't get this. Like one Bitcoin is divisible to Satoshis, 100 million Satoshis. So it's very divisible in terms of like the amount that represents a chunk versus the amount that represents something you could get a coffee with. The dollar certainly is highly divisible. It's kind of weird because they seem to be like taking cash and coins out of circulation. That was happening a lot during COVID. I'm not really sure exactly what's happening with that right now. Gold sucks in terms of divisibility because then you're like literally cutting up a physical thing into different pieces. So divisibility, with anything like with anything digital, I'm not saying that that's a recommendation for other kinds of digital investments, but like with Bitcoin, certainly with Satoshis, I think that what we're going to approach here in the future at some point is the parity between one Satoshi equals $1, because the dollar is going down and Bitcoin's going up, but the divisibility is like very, very easy with Bitcoin. It's very, very easy with cash or with like digital US dollars, the debit credit system. Not so easy with gold. And then uniformity, which is also sometimes termed fungibility. That is a great strength of Bitcoin. Other kinds of stores of value, like jewels or art or real estate, not so much. The ability to recognize like a 1-for-1 kind of trade, like one of my Bitcoin is equal to one of your Bitcoin, one of my US dollars is equal to one of your US dollars, one of my US dollars is not equal to one of your Zimbabwe dollars, so the uniformity matters. And then acceptability means that I can transact with that. So cash or like any form of currency represents some kind of trade that you can make with people that is a symbol of my stored economic value. So I might have a bunch of eggs from chickens I have that laid eggs, and you might have a bunch of bread, but I don't need your bread or you don't need my eggs. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily like something that we could barter about. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So it's not necessarily like acceptable. Whereas, when we abstract the concept of currency from wealth or stored economic value, then I can give you $1, you can give me $1. I could give you 1 Satoshi, you could give me 1 Satoshi. So in terms of the 5 characteristics of money, that was interesting to me, but it hadn't actually, I guess I was thinking about things through a little bit of I can see it's like getting dark and the light is a little bit dark. I need to wrap this up. Through the lens of I don't know, these economic principles are somehow applied from the top down, like some egghead at Harvard or something like that, decided that these are the characteristics of money. But it was super interesting to learn about them as being characteristics that throughout time, for all of history, everyone has needed currency. Everyone has needed to have some format with which to exchange economic stored labor, like the fruits of our stored labor. And that any group of people, like any society, is just going to gravitate to whether that's like shells or beads or precious metals or leaves on a tree or currency, like any kind of thing, whatever is the thing that is available to them that's going to best capture and best exemplify these 5 characteristics of money, they're just going to move to that because there's such a powerful incentive to do that, in order to be able to like commerce and transact. So when people feel like they've missed the boat with Bitcoin, this is like Bitcoin is like an ego test. And so there's a lot of people now that are like, woulda, coulda, shoulda, like it's worth so much more than it was now then. And like I was talking to a guy in 2010 and I had a chance, or I had some, then I sold it, that like this kind of thing is like super prevalent. And they're like, damn, I missed the boat, because now it went from where it was then to where it is now. It's like, that's the ego test right now. I can see the light is getting so dark. I really have to wrap this up. That's the ego test, where if you can't kind of like drill into that, like it sucks to have missed that opportunity. But you have to ask the question, like, why did Bitcoin so exemplify something like these 5 characteristics of money, for instance, being a store of value and being portable, and being acceptable, all these things that not only did it hold its value, but it increased its value so dramatically in this period of time that you missed the boat on. Is any of that subject to change, or have you maybe not missed the boat? That's what I'm saying about the ego test. Maybe you didn't miss the boat. Maybe like all of these things are still in play economically, and so learning about it a little bit causes you to realize that everything that took it from where it was 16 years ago to where it is now is going to take it so much further in the next 16 years, and then in the next 30 years, the next 50 years, the next 100 years, and the next 150 years. Bitcoin will not, the mining of the like 21 million possible Bitcoin will not be complete until 2140, after we're all long dead. This is like a long-term project, so so that ego test right there, I think it's valuable to look into things like what is money? Like, what represents something that people, they don't have to understand anything about economics or anything about the history of fiat currency, anything like that. And they will still powerfully go towards this thing versus that thing, because this thing better exemplifies those 5 categories, So Bitcoin is the most perfect money so far, that exemplifies those 5 categories in terms of the store of value, in terms of portability, in terms of visibility, in terms of recognizability. The recognizability is really like lagged behind because people are still sort of like, oh, it's an investment, like it's a gamble, it's a risk, so it just takes more time with that. It's getting super dark. Sorry, I wanted to like talk about this a little bit longer, but let me just like close out by saying that you just can't do wrong by following Michael Saylor and listening to some stuff that he has to say, following Robert Breedlove and some stuff that he has to say, and that I've benefited immensely from getting my hands wrapped around a few of the like really fundamental basic economics that we're not taught in school, and that cause you to sort of like reframe your entire thinking about like what why have certain things gone down and up, what stands to have a future, and I'm a big Bitcoin maxi for sure. So anyway, it's crazy dark right now. Okay, I'm gonna say goodbye.